Jacob Turner lived alone on a sprawling ranch in the middle of nowhere. The land stretched for miles in every direction, with acres of green pastures dotted with cattle and horses. Jacob was a man who had built his life around the ranch. From the moment he woke up before dawn to the moment he went to bed at night, it was all about work. He had no time for distractions, no time for anything beyond the daily tasks that kept the ranch running. It wasn't always like this. Jacob had grown up on the ranch, his family teaching him the ways of farming and ranching since he was a young boy. He learned how to ride horses, fix fences, and herd cattle before most kids even knew how to ride a bike. His parents, his brothers, and his younger sister had all worked alongside him, making the ranch a bustling home full of life and laughter. They were his world, and life was good. But life, as it often does, changed. The first blow came when Jacob's mother fell ill, then his father soon after. Both of them passed away within a year, leaving Jacob to carry on the legacy of the ranch alone. It was a heavy burden, but he managed, focusing all his energy on keeping the place running as smoothly as possible. His siblings, scattered in different parts of the country, tried to help, but the land and livestock required a presence that no one else could provide. Jacob didn't mind. He was used to hard work, and if he had learned anything from his parents, it was to never complain. However, the years took a toll. The lonely evenings spent in the quiet of the house, the long nights when he was the only one awake tending to the cattle, the silence that crept into the corners of his life, it all started to wear on him. The loneliness began to feel like a weight he couldn't shake off, a presence that was always there, no matter how busy he kept himself. It was a silent ache in his heart, a longing he tried to ignore but couldn't escape. Jacob loved the ranch, loved the work that came with it, but the silence of living alone started to gnaw at him. It wasn't that he didn't have friends. There was Max, an old buddy who had grown up in the area and worked on a nearby farm. Max would stop by every now and then, and the two of them would drink a beer, share some stories, and talk about old times. But it wasn't the same. No matter how many people Jacob talked to, no matter how many social gatherings he attended, it never filled the space in his heart. The space left behind when his family was gone. Jacob was a strong man, both physically and emotionally. He had worked with his hands for most of his life, building things, fixing things, and making sure everything on the ranch ran smoothly. People admired him for his strength, his independence, and his ability to do everything on his own. But beneath all that, Jacob was just like anyone else. He wanted to be loved. He wanted companionship. He wanted someone to share his life with. But for the longest time, he didn't know how to make that happen. He had been to town a few times, to the local diner or the small grocery store, and every time, there were women there. Some were friendly, some were just passing through, but none of them caught his eye. He didn't want a woman who was just looking for an escape from her own life, someone who didn't understand the hard work and dedication that came with ranching. He didn't want a woman who would only be here for a short time and then leave when the novelty wore off. He wanted someone who would stand by his side, who would get up at dawn to tend the animals, who would be there when the storms came, both literal and emotional. But the more Jacob thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't sure if he was even ready for a relationship. After all, what did he have to offer? He had a ranch, sure, but that was about it. He didn't have a fancy house, he didn't have a lot of extra money, and he didn't have the kind of life that many women would dream of. His life was tough, demanding, and unrelenting. The days were long and the work never stopped. His idea of a perfect evening was a quiet meal, and then a walk around the property, checking the fences, making sure everything was in order. Not exactly romantic. Still, the craving for companionship gnawed at him. It wasn't just about having someone around to help with chores or share a meal. It was about having someone to talk to, someone to laugh with, someone who would understand what he was going through. He had friends, sure, but it wasn't the same. There was a certain emptiness to the days, a kind of hollow feeling in his chest that no amount of work could fill. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Jacob sat down on the porch of his house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was a mixture of oranges and purples, and the air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh-cut hay. Jacob had always loved this time of day. It was quiet, peaceful. But tonight it felt different. Tonight the silence was heavier. He didn't want to admit it, but the truth was clear in his mind. He was lonely. The realization hit him hard. He had been pushing it away for so long. telling himself that he was fine on his own, that he didn't need anyone. But that night it all came crashing down. He wanted more than this life of solitude. He wanted someone to share it with. He didn't want to grow old alone, to be the old man in the rocking chair on the porch with no one to talk to, no one to love. Jacob sighed and rubbed his face. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. His life was tough. The work was hard and the days were long. But he was ready to try. He was ready to find someone, even if it meant stepping outside of his comfort zone. Maybe it would take time, maybe it wouldn't work out at all, but he couldn't keep living like this. Hurry up. I crave, he whispered to himself, realizing the truth in those words. He had waited too long. He had ignored his own desires for too long. But now, for the first time in years, Jacob was ready to face the truth. He needed more than the ranch. He needed someone by his side, someone who would walk this hard, beautiful path with him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. But what did he have to lose? Jacob woke up early the next morning, as he always did. The sun had barely risen, casting a golden glow over the ranch. He stretched his tired limbs, feeling the aches of the previous day's work in his back and shoulders. But despite the physical exhaustion, there was something different about today. A quiet sense of anticipation lingered in the air. Maybe it was the thought of change, or maybe it was just the lingering feeling of his own loneliness that had become too heavy to ignore. Either way, he knew that something had to give. For the first time in years, Jacob didn't feel content with the quiet of his ranch. The silence no longer felt peaceful but oppressive. He had been living like this for so long, filling the emptiness with hard work, the routine of daily chores, and the occasional visit from Max. But all of that felt shallow now. Deep down, he was craving something more, someone to share his life with. He wasn't sure how to go about it, but he knew he couldn't continue the way he had been. It wasn't like Jacob was completely clueless about relationships. He had known people, even been in a few relationships when he was younger, but they hadn't worked out. His dedication to the ranch had always come first, and that had left little room for romance. Women had come and gone, but they never seemed to understand the life he had chosen. He was a rancher. His days were long, his work was tough, and he couldn't afford to put everything aside for a date night or a weekend getaway. It was a lifestyle that required commitment, and not everyone was willing to take that on. So he had settled into the idea of being alone, thinking he would never find someone who would truly understand him. But the more Jacob thought about it, the more he realized he had been wrong. His loneliness wasn't just about not having someone to share his bed or his dinner table with. It was deeper than that. He wanted someone who could be part of his world, the world of hard work, of sunrises and sunsets over wide, open spaces, of cows and horses, of long days followed by quiet nights under the stars. He didn't want someone who would just fill the space in his home. He wanted someone who would share the weight of the life he had chosen. He sat down at the kitchen table and stared at his coffee mug, deep in thought. There had to be a way. There had to be someone out there who could understand what he was looking for. Someone who could see beyond the tough exterior and recognize the man inside. But how would he find her? He wasn't the kind of man who went out to bars or attended social gatherings, and besides, he had no desire for fleeting relationships. Then it hit him. He didn't need to wait for fate to bring someone to him. Maybe, just maybe, he could take matters into his own hands. Jacob wasn't one to easily ask for help or step outside of his comfort zone. He had always done things on his own. But this time he couldn't keep putting it off. He had to try something different. That afternoon, after a long day of working with the cattle, Jacob made a decision. He would place an ad. The thought made him nervous. What if no one responded? What if the only replies he got were from women who wanted something he couldn't give? But even as he hesitated, the feeling of longing inside him only grew stronger. He needed to try. Jacob sat down at his desk and started writing. It was harder than he had expected, trying to find the right words to describe the kind of woman he was looking for. He wasn't sure how to explain it. How could he describe the life he led, a life full of dirt, sweat, and endless hours of hard work? And yet, he knew there had to be someone out there who could see the beauty in it. After several drafts, Jacob finally settled on something simple, but honest. Looking for someone who appreciates the ranch life, loves the outdoors, and is willing to work hard and enjoy the quiet beauty of country living. If you're someone who can find joy in the simple things and isn't afraid of getting their hands dirty, I'd love to hear from you. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and that's all he could offer. The moment Jacob hit send on the ad, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. What had he just done? He felt exposed, vulnerable, like he had just opened a door to a whole new world of possibilities, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. What if he made a fool of himself? What if no one cared? But then, just as quickly as the doubts crept in, he shook them off. There was no turning back now. The ad was out there, and he had done his best. He had taken the first step toward changing his life. Days passed, and Jacob returned to his routine, but he couldn't help feeling a little more hopeful than usual. He checked his phone more often, hoping for a message or a response. But nothing came. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no reply. Jacob began to think that maybe he had been wrong. Maybe this wasn't the way to go about it after all. Maybe the ranch was just meant to be his companion for the rest of his life. Then, on a quiet afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed to him in a neat handwritten script. Jacob's heart skipped a beat as he opened the envelope. It was from a woman named Emily Harris. At first glance, Jacob didn't know what to make of it. She was from the city, far away from the ranching life Jacob knew. The letter was kind and polite, but it didn't seem like someone who would fit in at all. Emily talked about how she had read his ad and was intrigued by the idea of a quieter life in the country. She explained that she had been through some tough times and was looking for a change. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully embrace the ranch life, but she was willing to give it a try. Jacob stared at the letter for a long time, unsure of what to think. A city girl? Someone who had no experience with life on a ranch? He wasn't sure if he should be excited or skeptical. But then again, what did he have to lose? Maybe this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The chance to meet someone who wasn't afraid to take a chance. Someone who was willing to see the beauty in a life that wasn't always easy but was always real. He read the letter once more, then made up his mind. Jacob picked up the phone, dialed the number at the bottom of the letter, and waited for the sound of the other end to pick up. Jacob's hands were a little sweaty as he held the phone to his ear, listening to the ringing sound echo in his head. He wasn't sure what to expect. The woman, Emily Harris, had seemed so different from the life he led, so different from the kind of person he thought would ever be interested in a place like his ranch. But now, after weeks of waiting, here he was, dialing the number she had left at the bottom of the letter she had sent him. When the phone finally clicked, a soft voice answered. "Hello?" The voice was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the nerves that had taken root in Jacob's stomach. Jacob cleared his throat before responding. Hi. Is this Emily?" "Yes, this is Emily," she said. "Who's this?" "This is Jacob Turner," he replied, his voice unsure. "The man who placed the ad in the paper. I received your letter." There was a moment of silence on the other end, and Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What if she didn't remember sending it? What if she had second thoughts about the whole thing? But then Emily spoke again, this time with more enthusiasm. "Oh, wow. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I'm glad you called. I wasn't sure if my letter would actually reach you." Jacob couldn't help but smile, though no one could see it. "Well, I guess I'm not the kind of guy who takes a lot of time when it comes to making decisions." He laughed nervously, though it wasn't exactly true. He had spent days, maybe even weeks, weighing the decision to contact her. But hearing her voice, hearing the sincerity in it, made him feel a little more confident. "So, you mentioned in your letter that you were interested in the country life?" Jacob asked, trying to steer the conversation in a direction that didn't feel too awkward. "I have to admit it's a bit different than what you might be used to." Emily chuckled softly. "Yeah, I figured it might be. I'm originally from the city, as I mentioned in the letter. But things haven't exactly been going well there, and I feel like I need a change. I've been looking for something simpler, a way to clear my head, and, well, your ad caught my attention." Jacob nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He could hear the uncertainty in her voice just as he felt it in his own. "I can understand that. The city can be a lot sometimes. It's different out here. It's quieter, more open, but it's also a lot of work. It's not the kind of life you just jump into without thinking." There was a slight pause before Emily spoke again, this time with a little more hesitation. "I know. I've never done anything like this before. but I'm ready to try. I don't want to keep living the way I have been." Jacob couldn't help but be impressed by her honesty. It wasn't easy to open up about wanting to change, to admit that the life one had been living wasn't working anymore. And yet here was Emily, a stranger, sharing something that felt personal. "I appreciate that," Jacob said. "It's not easy to just drop everything and start fresh. This place can be a lot, and it's not for everyone. It's hard work. It's early mornings and long days, but there's something about it. There's a certain peace, a way of life that's different from what you might be used to." "I'm okay with hard work," Emily replied. "I've been through some tough times myself, so I think I can handle it." Jacob paused, trying to imagine what those tough times might have been. He didn't want to press her for details, not yet, but something in her voice made him want to know more. Still, he kept the conversation focused on the ranch. "Well, there's a lot to learn out here," Jacob said. "If you're serious about trying, I can show you the ropes. I've been working this land for a long time, and I know it inside and out. It's a lot of work, but it's also rewarding in its own way." "I think I can handle it," Emily said with a little more confidence. "I'm ready to take the plunge, even if it's scary. I'm not sure where this will lead, but I want to see what it's like." Jacob nodded, his chest tightening with a mix of excitement and nerves. He wasn't sure if she was just looking for an escape, or if she was genuinely ready to embrace the life he had worked so hard to build. But either way, there was something about the way she spoke that made him think she was more than just a passing dream. She seemed determined. "Well, if you're serious about it," Jacob said, his voice steady, "I can meet you at the ranch tomorrow. We can talk in person, see how you feel about it when you're here." "Tomorrow? I'd love that," Emily replied, her voice full of enthusiasm. "I'll be there." Jacob hung up the phone, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what to expect. Emily was a stranger to him, and he was a stranger to her. But there was something about their conversation that made him feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the start of something new, something that could change both of their lives. The next day, Jacob spent the morning preparing for Emily's visit. He made sure the house was tidy, the ranch was in order, and that everything looked presentable. As much as he told himself it didn't matter, he wasn't trying to impress her, it still mattered. He wanted her to feel comfortable here, to see that he wasn't just a man stuck in the past. He wanted to show her the life he had built, the life he was proud of, even if it wasn't perfect. Around noon, Jacob saw a car approach the ranch. It was a small sedan, much smaller than the trucks he was used to seeing, but it was unmistakably heading his way. His heart skipped a beat as he stood by the porch, watching the car pull up and come to a stop in front of the house. The door opened, and out stepped Emily. She was wearing a simple pair of jeans and a light jacket, her dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. She looked a little out of place, but there was something about the way she held herself that made Jacob feel at ease. She wasn't here to judge him. She wasn't here to be a tourist. She was here to see if this life was something she could handle, something that could give her the peace she had been searching for. "Hi, Jacob," Emily said as she stepped up onto the porch. Her smile was nervous but genuine. Jacob gave her a nod. "Hey, Emily, glad you made it." Emily looked around at the ranch, her eyes scanning the wide-open spaces, the barns in the distance, the cattle grazing in the fields. "Wow," she said softly. "This place, it's so different from what I'm used to." Jacob chuckled. "Yeah, it takes some getting used to." The two of them stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. Jacob wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning, and he was ready to see where it would lead. Jacob watched Emily as she looked around the ranch, her eyes wide, taking in the open fields, the barn in the distance, and the scattered livestock grazing peacefully. There was a quiet excitement in her expression, mixed with a bit of uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, Jacob felt a spark of hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe Emily wasn't just looking for an escape from her past, but was truly ready for a new chapter. So, Jacob began, breaking the silence. "You want to take a walk around? I can show you the place." Emily turned to him, her smile a little unsure but genuine. "Yeah, I'd love that." Jacob led the way and they started walking toward the barn. Emily's steps were hesitant at first, as if she wasn't sure what to expect. Jacob, on the other hand, had always walked this land with confidence. It was his home, his way of life, and he had never thought about it much before. But now, with Emily beside him, he saw it in a new light. He noticed the little things, The way the grass seemed greener today, the scent of fresh hay in the air, the distant calls of the birds. It was as if the land itself had come alive with the presence of another person. They made their way past the barn, and Jacob pointed out the stables where he kept the horses. "This is where we keep the horses. They're a bit stubborn, but once you get to know them, they're good." Emily stopped, peering into the barn, her eyes studying the horses curiously. "They're beautiful. Do you ride them often?" "Yeah, most mornings I do," Jacob replied, a bit of pride in his voice. "Helps keep the cattle in line. They're more reliable than a truck sometimes." Emily laughed softly. "I've never been on a horse before. I'm not sure I could even stay on one." Jacob smiled at her hesitation. "It's not as hard as it looks. I'll teach you if you want. It takes some time, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad." Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? I'd love that. I've always wanted to try, but I never had the chance." Jacob felt a warmth spread through him. Emily wasn't just here to watch from the sidelines. She was eager to learn, to become part of this life. That was something Jacob had never expected. He had thought that maybe she would come, take a look around, and decide that this was too much. But here she was, willing to try, to give this life a chance. As they continued walking, Jacob showed her the different areas of the ranch, the fields where the cattle grazed, the creek that ran through the property, and the small garden near the house where Jacob grew his own vegetables. Emily asked questions along the way, her curiosity growing with every step. It was clear that she was fascinated by the simplicity of it all. "So, what made you want to live like this?" Emily asked, glancing at Jacob as they passed a patch of wildflowers by the creek. Jacob thought for a moment before answering. "It's the land, really. There's something about it that makes you feel like you're part of something bigger. It's not easy work, but it's honest. There's a rhythm to it that I've come to love. It's hard to explain, but when you work this land, you understand it in a way that's different from anything else." Emily nodded, as if she understood, even though she had never known anything like it. "I get that. I've always felt like there was something missing in the city. It's loud, crowded, and everything's moving so fast. I don't know where I belong there anymore." Jacob turned to look at her, seeing the sadness in her eyes. He had always known that city life wasn't for everyone, but hearing it from someone who had lived it made him realize how lucky he was to have this life, even with all the hard work. "Maybe you'll find it here," Jacob said quietly. "Sometimes the quiet life has its way of putting things into perspective." They reached the edge of the property, where a small hill overlooked the land below. Jacob paused and gestured to the view. "This is where I come when I need to clear my head. The view here, it's something else. You can see everything, the whole ranch, the fields, the sky. It's peaceful." Emily stood beside him, looking out at the landscape. For a moment, neither of them said anything. There was just the wind in the grass, the hum of distant insects, and the quiet beauty of the land stretching out before them. "It's beautiful," Emily said softly. "I've never seen anything like this before. The city is so different. It's all buildings and noise here. It's so wide open, so calm." Jacob smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Yeah, it's easy to forget how lucky we are living out here. Sometimes you just have to stop and appreciate it." They stood there for a while, taking in the view, before Jacob turned back to the house. "I'll show you the animals tomorrow. There'll be a lot of work, but they're the backbone of the ranch." Emily nodded eagerly. "I'm looking forward to it." Over the next few days, Jacob and Emily spent more time together, with Jacob teaching her the ins and outs of ranch life. At first it was small things, learning how to gather the eggs from the chicken coop, feeding the cattle, and helping Jacob clean out the barn. But as the days passed, Emily grew more comfortable, her confidence building as she took on more tasks. Jacob couldn't help but admire her determination. She wasn't afraid of getting dirty or making mistakes. She was willing to learn, and that was something that made her different from others he had known. One afternoon, as they were walking back from the fields, Emily turned to Jacob, a little breathless from the work they had done. "You know, I never imagined I'd be doing this. I never thought I could actually handle it." Jacob smiled at her, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I told you it wasn't easy, but it's not so bad once you get into a rhythm." "And you're doing great," Emily grinned a little shyly. "I guess I'm starting to see why you love it so much. There's something satisfying about all the hard work. It feels real." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He had never expected her to understand it so quickly, but here she was, seeing the value in the very thing that had always kept him going. As the week went on, Jacob felt something growing between them, something deeper than just shared work and moments of laughter. Emily was no longer just a visitor. She was becoming part of the ranch, becoming part of his life, and Jacob realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was beginning to care for her in a way he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jacob turned to Emily. "You know, I never thought I'd find someone who could appreciate this life the way you do." Emily looked at him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "I never thought I'd find a place like this either. It's different here. It feels like home." Jacob smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I think it's starting to feel like home for both of us." The weeks passed, and with each passing day, the bond between Jacob and Emily grew stronger. They had settled into a routine. Early mornings spent tending to the animals, long afternoons working the fields, and quiet evenings together, sharing stories from their pasts. Jacob had never imagined that life could feel so full. The house, once quiet and still, now felt warmer with Emily's presence. But even with the growing connection between them, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding back. He was afraid to get too close, afraid that if he allowed himself to care too much, he might lose everything again. He had lost his family once, and the thought of opening his heart to someone else only to have it broken scared him more than anything. Emily, on the other hand, seemed more at ease. She had found her place in this new world, embraced the rhythms of ranch life, and seemed to be flourishing. But even she, despite her growing confidence, sensed that Jacob was still holding something back. She had never expected to fall in love with a rancher, but as time passed, she realized that Jacob wasn't just a man living a solitary life on a ranch. He was someone who had a deep passion for what he did, someone who had a quiet strength that drew her in. She wanted to be part of that life, not just as a visitor, but as someone who could stand by his side. It was on one of those warm evenings when the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink that things began to change. They had just finished dinner, and Jacob had stepped outside to sit on the porch, gazing at the vast stretch of land before him. Emily joined him, sitting down beside him, her legs tucked beneath her. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. Emily finally broke the silence. "You know," she said softly, her voice hesitant but sincere, "I've been thinking a lot about this place. About us." Jacob turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she paused, searching for the right words. "I never thought I'd feel so at home here. When I first came, I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't know if I'd be able to keep up with the work, if I'd ever really fit in. But now," she smiled, looking out at the horizon, "now it feels like I belong here with you." Jacob felt a rush of emotions well up inside him, pride, hope, but also fear. He wanted so badly to believe in this. He wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could understand his world, someone he could share this life with. But even as he felt that longing stir inside him, the walls he had built around his heart remained firmly in place. "Emily," Jacob began, his voice low, "this life isn't easy. You've seen how hard the work is, how long the days can get. There's a lot of responsibility here. I'm not sure if I'm the kind of man you want to be with. I've got my routines, my way of doing things, and I don't want to drag you into all of it, especially if you're just starting to get comfortable." Emily turned to face him, her expression serious but soft. "Jacob, I'm not afraid of hard work. I've seen how much it means to you, how much you've put into this place. And I've learned to love it too, the peace of it, the quiet rhythm of the day. It's not about what's easy, it's about what feels right. And right now, this feels right. You feel right." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to say something, to tell her how he felt, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain the fear that held him back? The fear of losing someone he cared for again. How could he admit that he had spent so many years hiding behind his work, afraid of the heartache that love could bring? Emily reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I'm not going anywhere, Jacob. I know this isn't easy, but that's why I'm here. Because I want to be part of your life in whatever way that means. You don't have to do this alone." The sincerity in her voice, the way she looked at him with such understanding, caused the walls around Jacob's heart to crack just a little. He had spent so long hiding behind his pride, thinking that he could do everything on his own, but now, with Emily's hand in his, he realized that he didn't have to. He didn't have to carry all the weight of the world by himself. Jacob's voice broke for a moment, but he pushed through. I'm scared, Emily, scared of letting someone in. I've lost people before, and I don't know if I can handle that kind of hurt again. Emily squeezed his hand. I understand. I've been through my own share of pain. But I'm not asking you to forget your past. I just want to be with you in your future. Jacob looked into her eyes, and for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace he had found in the quiet of the ranch, but something deeper, something that came from knowing that he didn't have to face everything alone. Slowly, Jacob nodded, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I want that too, Emily. I want to build something with you, something real. It was a quiet admission, but it meant everything. Emily smiled back, her eyes shining with emotion. Then let's do it. Together. And just like that, Jacob felt the last of his doubts fade away. The fear that had once held him back was replaced by something stronger. Hope. The hope that maybe, after all these years of working the land alone, he could share it with someone who not only understood him but loved him for who he was. As the days went on, Jacob and Emily's connection deepened. They worked together side by side, tackling every task that came their way. Emily proved herself to be more than capable, handling the ranch life with a strength and determination that impressed Jacob every day. But it wasn't just her work ethic that impressed him, it was her heart. She was kind, compassionate, and full of life. She brought something to the ranch that Jacob hadn't even realized it was missing. Joy. The storms of doubt that had once clouded Jacob's mind began to clear. He realized that love wasn't just about avoiding pain. It was about taking the risk to open yourself up to someone else, knowing that the journey might not always be easy, but it would be worth it. And with Emily by his side, he finally felt ready to face whatever came their way. A few months later, in the heart of the spring, with the fields blooming and the ranch in full swing, Jacob took Emily's hand once more. This time it wasn't just about work or the land, it was about their future together. Emily, Jacob said, his voice steady, I can't imagine my life without you. I want you to stay. I want you to be part of this life, part of my life. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she nodded, a smile spreading across her face. I'm already here, Jacob. I've been here all along. And in that moment, Jacob knew that he had found what he had been searching for. Not just a partner in work, but a partner in life. Together, they would face whatever the future held, not just as two individuals, but as a team, united by love, respect, and the quiet strength of the land they had both come to cherish.